Democrats once saw outrage as a path to midterm success, but is that outrage starting to backfire? I'm Tanya Rivero in for Elaine Quijano, and this is Red and Blue.
The messaging isn't as clear to the communities that we're trying to represent. Are we fighting or not?
Ahead on Red and Blue, Democratic Party infighting breaks into the open on topics ranging from the Supreme Court to immigration.
We need to rebuild our immigration system from top to bottom, starting by replacing ICE with something that reflects our morality.
Abolishing ICE will accomplish nothing unless we change the Trump policies.
Democrats are even arguing over arguing.
I strongly disagree with those who advocate harassing folks if they don't agree with you.
Leadership like Chuck Schumer's will do anything that they think is necessary to protect their leadership.
But we begin at Monday's White House briefing, where Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders weighed in on Democrats' approach to immigration.
The president last Thursday wrote on Twitter, House Republicans should pass the strong but fair immigration bill known as Goodlatte 2 in their afternoon vote today. Then on Sunday, he wrote on Twitter, I never pushed the Republicans in the House to vote for the immigration bill, either Goodlatte 1 or 2. Why would the president lie about something like that?
He didn't. The president has talked all along. We've laid out the priorities and the principles that we support, that we wanted to see reflected in legislation, that at the same time the president wasn't aggressively lobbying members because he knew that Democrats in the Senate still were unwilling to actually come to the table and focus on solutions rather than playing political games. And Democrats have made it abundantly clear that they don't actually want to fix problems. They just want to talk about this all the way. I guess for some reason they think this is a good issue for them, although it isn't.
It's been just a few weeks since images of children in cages took over the national conversation. Elected Democrats converged on the southern border with a united message of outrage. But since then, Democrats' disagreements about where to go next have broken into the open. A growing number this weekend said immigration and customs enforcement should be abolished. New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who is considered a possible 2020 presidential candidate, said on Facebook, quote, we need to abolish ICE, and went on to call the agency a cruel deportation force. But other Democrats aren't sure Gillibrand has a winning strategy.
I want to ask you, sir, do you agree with your colleague, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, that we should get rid of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, as that agency is known?
Abolishing ICE will accomplish nothing unless we change the Trump policies.
You abolish ICE now, you still have the same president with the same failed policies. Whatever you replace it with is just going to still reflect what this president wants to do.
The party's approach to the Supreme Court vacancy has brought new attention to these divides. The Washington Post's Michael Scherer summarizes the party's dispute this way in a new piece titled A Bad Week for Democrats Gives Rise to a Big Problem. Outrage could become an obstacle in midterms. Michael Scherer is with us from Washington now. He's a national political reporter for the Washington Post. Michael, and we're also joined by Molly Hooper. She is a CBSN political contributor and Capitol Hill reporter for The Hill. Let me start with you, Michael. Why are Democrats divided on what they want to do to the agency?
It's more a tactical and a messaging division, I think, than anything else. The term abolish ICE suggests getting rid of all internal to the country immigration enforcement. And really, there are not any Democratic politicians who've proposed that. What they've said is they want to get rid, some have said they want to get rid of the agency as a way of getting rid of the tactics the agency has started to use under the Trump administration. And other Democrats have pointed out that as a soundbite, that doesn't play well in a lot of places and allows for easy characterization by Republicans. And this all gets back to this underlying question. There's an enormous amount of anger and frustration in the Democratic Party right now. And with the Supreme Court vacancy, with the continued detention of children separated from their parents at the border, Democrats are concerned that it's going to come out in ways that actually hurt their election prospects instead of help.
And Michael, I do think also that a lot of Americans aren't quite aware of the difference between Border Patrol and Border Patrol agents and ICE. These are two totally distinct organizations.
Yeah, the easy way to think about it is that ICE deals with immigration enforcement inside the country, and the Border Patrol patrols the borders. So even if you did get rid of ICE, and like I said, the Democratic proposals are for basically reorienting the bureaucracy, getting rid of the name, putting the bureaucracy or the same enforcement tools in different agencies or in a new agency. It doesn't affect what's happening on the border.
Right, and ICE is a relatively new organization, correct? It was formed, what, in 2003?
Yeah, it was formed after the 9/11 attacks when the Department of Homeland Security took in a bunch of agencies, and they reoriented how they patrolled the border and dealt with immigration.
And Molly, I'd like to bring you in now. How are Democrats on Capitol Hill reacting to this debate that some say is splitting the party?
Well, you know, it's interesting. If you look back at 2014 and immigration was an issue, obviously, then you see something very similar happening to certain party leaders like Joe Crowley, who lost his election in New York. That happened to Eric Cantor back in 2014, who lost to this outside, individual, Dave Bratt, who had a lot of energy, has a lot of energy, and was seen sort of as this new, as a continuation of the Tea Party, and an increase in, taking, less establishment, taking on non-establishment figures in the party. And so when you're hearing Democrats on Capitol Hill reacting to abolishing ICE, it's a very loaded question, because immigration played a key role in Eric Cantor's defeat back in 2014, and it's going to be playing a key issue in what's going on right now within the party for Democrats. And so you'll see different reactions, as we heard Richard Blumenthal on CBS Face the Nation Sunday saying, yes, there you go, saying, it will do nothing unless you get rid of the Trump policies. And when it comes to the zero tolerance policy, that's actually the DOJ. That's Jeff Sessions carrying out those orders, via Border Patrol. So again, it's
so
a
many
little
distinct organizations involved in the
Exactly.
overarching immigration policy. Michael, I want to get back to you for a second. A Harvard-Harris poll found that 69% of Americans and 59% of Democrats oppose disbanding immigrations and customs enforcement. With that in mind, why do you think some Dems are still calling for an end to the agency? Is it just playing well to this growing sort of left-wing base?
I think it's you had a clip at the top there of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying Democrats need to start fighting, and I think that's really what it's about. Republicans have said for a long time we need to abolish the IRS, abolish the Department of Education, and I think Democrats just want a fighting message, and when they hear that aggression, a lot of activists are attracted to it. It clearly worked in her House primary fight in Queens. It clearly won't work in a lot of districts that Democrats are trying to pick up this fall. So it's about the party sort of coming to terms with allowing a diversity of voices, a diversity of tactics, and then hoping that Republicans are not able to magnify the more extreme elements and convince the country that's what the Democratic Party is.
But Michael, your article, though, seems to take the tack that this is dividing the Democratic Party and is ultimately weakening the party. But some are saying, hey, actually, this is energizing the party. Right. And if those on the, if those old school Democrats would actually just listen to what the younger kids are saying, that it would actually help the party.
Well, I think it's an open question. It's clearly also energizing the party. There's a poll out today, actually, that showed a 17-point advantage when you ask, are you more excited to vote for your congressman or woman this fall than normal? Democrats are far more excited right now, and it's because of the same energy. That energy is a huge asset for the Democratic Party. The question is whether that energy will also create liabilities for the party, in the form of Maxine Waters and in the form of these sort of debates.
Right. Now, Molly, as we've been discussing, perhaps one of the biggest shakeups to the Democratic Party's power structure recently was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's victory over Congressman Joe Crowley. We interviewed her right here on CBSN, and on Sunday's Meet the Press, Ocasio-Cortez discussed what contributed to her win. Let's listen for a moment.
I do think that there was certainly a lack of presence, and that was a big part of my win. There was, I think, a lack of listening on the ground, a lack of going to the grocery store and saying, hey, how are you doing? And that is an important part of representation, because we have a lot of work that we have to do here in D.C., but that work needs to be rooted in the communities that we have been elected to represent.
And so, Molly, does she have a point? I mean, she did not take one corporate dollar for her entire campaign. So is there a concern among Democratic voters, especially the younger ones, that their representatives are out of touch?
Well, and I wanted to say absolutely, because there is a correlation. If you look at what happened to Eric Cantor, who was then the #2 Republican in the House behind Speaker Boehner, sort of at the time seen as somebody who would, fill Boehner's shoes when he retired. He lost in a primary to an economics professor who had the energy, who has the energy, as I said, and was able to defeat him. A guy who taught students, was on the ground, while Eric Cantor, who was a prolific fundraiser, was going across the country raising money for the party. And that's something that I think happened to Joe Crowley. If you look at his position, he was sort of in line to take over the leader position from former Speaker, current Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, who hopes to be Speaker again one day soon. He was out there helping candidates across the country, but you have to remember that these members are running to represent their own district, and even though you feel like you're safe, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And again, there is a lot of energy, and that's where I think when we see members going home for their district work periods, they're legitimately going home this year, because there are so many concerns that there could be primary challenges either to the right or to the left. But here comes the challenge as well. In a district like Joe Crowley's, that's traditionally, it's a Democratic district, and it looks like Alexia has the will win that race. You look at other districts across the country where there could be a competitive general election race if the Democrat who wins the primary is to the left of the district, and that could be a concern as well. But again, we'll have to see how that plays out come November.
It'll be interesting to see if lawmakers from both parties will sort of heed the warning that the shot across the bow there from the 14th district. So, Michael, I want to ask you: do you think Democratic Party leadership is partially responsible for Crowley's loss?
Crowley is responsible for Crowley's loss, and he was part of Democratic Party leadership. I think there is this broader issue, which I think your question is getting at, of whether the leaders in the House are just too old and out of touch. And you do have a number of septuagenarians there who will have to fight, assuming Democrats are able to retake the House, to maintain their position. I think there's a lot of desire for some fresh blood, and they're going to have to solve that. It may be that Pelosi can hold on to being Speaker again, but it's very unlikely that she'll be surrounded by people her age at the top of the party if that does happen. Now, I don't think that's an issue that was really top of mind in Queens last Tuesday when people voted. I think she was Ocasio-Cortez was an incredibly attractive, compelling candidate with a great story, who was basically promising to bring politics back to the local community, after quite a long time of it not really being there. And I think that's what won the day.
Right. But it's so interesting to see how everyone has focused on her. Makes you wonder whether there is something of the zeitgeist about her victory. At a rally last week in North Dakota, President Trump commented on the race and had this to say about House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi.
I want to keep Nancy Pelosi right where she is with Maxine Waters. I want to keep Nancy Pelosi. Please, I want to make a plea to my Democrat friends. Please, please, please don't remove Nancy Pelosi. She should be where she is. And please keep Maxine Waters on the air as your face and your mouthpiece for the Democrat Party. Please.
So, Molly, is this kind of taunting by the president going to help or hurt moderate Democrats? And is it something that candidates on the left will use to campaign against them?
Well, here's where that Democrats in disarray storyline comes in, because You do have a number of Democrats who represent states, and this is Senate races, who represent states that Trump won by almost double digits. And, you know, the more you hear Democrats and progressive Democrats coming out saying they want to abolish ICE, I mean, look at what the president was doing this past weekend. He was saying, keep it up, you know, again, sort of a bit of taunting, but basically saying, you know, Democrats keep calling for the abolishment of ICE. It'll help our Republican candidates in districts and states where I won, because, again, there are more moderate, you know, they call them the so-called flyover country. I'm not sure if that's a positive or a negative thing, but I'm from California, to be just so you know, West Coast girl here. You know, these states and these districts that aren't as left or as conservative as various parts of the country, in key places where members and Republicans need to pick up seats and Democrats want to hold on to their seats, right. And that could be hurtful or harmful to them.
But I want to ask you, Michael, so aside from the sort of abolish ICE rallying cry, which is, like you said, a little bit of a marketing, you know, this new left is sort of talking also about universal health care, free public education, things that conceivably could appeal to a certain amount of the Trump base, especially those who are not as economically prosperous. So could this move toward the left actually help the party gain some of those voters?
It could, but, you know, I think the remarkable thing about the primaries we've seen so far in the Democratic Party is that even though you've had a general shift to the left in terms of the policies that the party is embracing, it hasn't really been an ideological fight. There are just a couple examples where the left candidate was able to overtake the sort of establishment-backed, more centrist candidate. The vast majority of these cases, the primary winner in the races that matter has been the candidate that the party wants, and they're candidates who are winning on biography. They're, you know, women who are accomplished in the military, they're African Americans, they're Latinos, they're businessmen, they're veterans. I mean, so, you know, that's the thing that's been driving most of these primaries. Now, I think that'll change when we get into towards 2020. I think that is the point at which the Democratic Party really has to flesh out what it's about, right, what policy it embraces. And it's certainly going to be more to the left, but it's just not clear that those ideological divisions are as divisive as they were for Republicans, for example, when you know, Dave Bratt won many years ago.
Michael, before we go, I want to ask you, though, you called this this anger sort of on the left a liability. Why is that?
I said it was potentially a liability, and that's because you could have a situation in which Democrats turn on each other or play into a characterization by President Trump that alienates middle-of-the-road voters in a lot of these suburban districts that will decide which party controls Congress next fall. And these are not places like Queens.
So on this question of civility versus incivility, you know, a lot of people say, well, the Democrats have to show some muscle. You know, this is not the time to be civil. Where do you think the greater liability lies for the Democratic Party?
Well, I'm not sure it's an either or, and I know Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi would agree that you can be aggressive and you can fight without hounding people as they shop at Macy's, as Maxine Waters suggested. And you saw very quickly last week the leader of both the House and the Senate Democrats come out and say what Maxine Waters had done was wrong, and we can't do that. She hasn't backed down, but you haven't seen any Democrats follow her into that breach. So I think that message has been sent pretty clearly within the party.
All right. Michael and Molly, thanks to both of you.
Thank you.